She saw the millionaire CEO with her friend and walked away. But a year later, he saw her with twins and regretted the reunion and to touch the twin. A very powerful story, but before proceeding, don't forget to like, subscribe and comment. I love Mr. Peter. Let's start with love. Some betrayals happen slowly, a gradual erosion of trust that gives you time to build defenses. Others detonate in a single moment, and you spend the rest of your life trying to remember who you were before the blast. Susie Overton stood in the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Hotel, watching the man she loved announce his engagement to another woman, and she understood with perfect clarity that she was about to be destroyed. The chandeliers above cast golden light across 500 faces, all of them strangers except one. Jack Lemmon stood on the raised platform in a black tuxedo that probably cost more than her rent, his hand wrapped around the delicate fingers of a woman who looked like she had been carved from expensive marble. The woman wore white, which seemed obscene given what Susie knew about the past 8 months. About the nights Jack had whispered promises into her hair while their bodies were still tangled together. "I am honored to announce my engagement to Bianca Ashford," Jack said, his voice carrying through the ballroom with the confidence of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. "Our families will be united, and I cannot imagine a more perfect partner for the future I am building." Bianca smiled, tilting her face toward him for a kiss that made the crowd applaud. Susie felt her knees buckle, but Tamara Booth caught her elbow, fingers digging in hard enough to leave marks. "We need to leave," Tamara hissed. "Right now, Susie, before this gets worse." But Susie could not move, could not look away, because surely there had been some mistake. Jack had called her 3 days ago, told her to wear something beautiful because tonight would be special, that he was finally ready to stop hiding what they meant to each other. She had saved for months to buy the black dress she wore, had practiced how to smile when meeting his family, had believed with her whole stupid heart that love could bridge any distance between their worlds. Jack descended from the platform, shaking hands and accepting congratulations, and Susie pushed through the crowd before conscious thought could stop her. She reached him near the bar, her voice breaking when she said his name. "Jack." He turned, and every drop of color drained from his face. For 3 seconds she saw something that looked like agony in his eyes. But then it vanished behind a mask so complete she wondered if she had imagined it. Susie. Her name came out flat, empty of everything that had filled it when he used to say it in the dark. "What are you doing here?" "You invited me." The words felt like glass in her throat. "You said tonight was important. You said we were going to stop pretending." Bianca appeared at Jack's elbow, her smile sharp as a blade. "Jack, darling, who is your friend?" "This is Susie Overton," Jack said, and Susie heard him choose his words with surgical precision. "She coordinated some events for the company. I may have mentioned this celebration in passing. I see." Bianca's eyes traveled over Susie's dress, her shoes, her face, cataloguing and dismissing in a single glance. "Well, it is sweet that you came to celebrate with us, but this is really a private affair for family and close friends." "Jack." Susie ignored Bianca completely, her eyes locked on his face. "Tell me what is happening. Tell me this is some kind of misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding." His voice could have frozen fire. "Bianca and I have been engaged for months. If you misinterpreted our professional relationship as something more personal, I apologize for any confusion." The ballroom had gone quiet around them. Hundreds of eyes watching this collision with the fascination people reserve for disasters. They are grateful not to be experiencing themselves. Professional. Susie felt something crack inside her chest. "You told me you loved me. You said I was the only real thing in your life. I think you have allowed your imagination to create a narrative that did not exist." Jack's face remained carved from stone. No flicker of recognition or remorse. "We spent some time together, yes, but it was never serious." "You are lying." Susie's voice rose despite her best efforts to control it. "4 nights ago, you were in my bed telling me I was your future." How can you stand there and pretend that never happened? A woman's voice cut through the tension like a knife through silk. That is quite enough. Eleanor Lehman materialized beside her son, a force of nature dressed in sapphire silk. She looked at Susie the way someone might examine something unpleasant they found on their shoe. I do not know what fantasy you have constructed, Eleanor said, each word precisely articulated, but my son would never involve himself with someone so clearly beneath our family's standards. Your desperation is showing, and it is embarrassing for everyone present. Mrs. Lehman, please. Susie hated the pleading in her own voice, but she could not stop the words from spilling out. Just let me talk to Jack alone for 5 minutes. Let him tell me the truth without all of you watching. The truth? Bianca laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Sweetheart, the truth is that men like Jack come from a world where marriages are about legacy and partnership, not fleeting attractions to pretty girls who mistake kindness for something more. You should be grateful you got to spend any time in his orbit and move on with some dignity. Susie looked at Jack one last time, searching his face for any sign of the man who had traced patterns on her skin and told her she made him feel alive for the first time in his life. She found nothing but cold dismissal. Tell me you never loved me, she said, her voice breaking completely now. Look me in the eye and tell me these 8 months meant nothing, and I will walk away. Jack met her gaze, and what he said next would echo in her nightmares for years to come. It meant nothing. You were a distraction during a stressful period, nothing more. I'm sorry if I gave you the wrong impression, but I'm asking you to leave now, before this becomes more unpleasant than it already is. Eleanor raised her hand, and 2 security guards appeared from the edges of the ballroom. Please escort this young woman out. She is clearly confused and needs to leave before she embarrasses herself further. Tamara was suddenly there, arm around Susie's shoulders, pulling her backward as the guards moved forward. Susie let herself be led toward the exit, her legs moving on autopilot while her mind shattered into pieces too small to reassemble. The last thing she saw before the ballroom doors closed was Jack standing beside Bianca, his mother's hand on his shoulder, watching her leave without a single word of defense or truth. The walk through the hotel lobby felt like drowning in air. Tamara kept talking, saying things Susie could not process, and when they reached the street, the November cold hit her face like a slap. She had forgotten her coat. She had forgotten everything except the look on Jack's face when he called their love nothing. Days blurred together. Susie stopped answering her phone, stopped going to work, stopped getting out of bed, except when her body demanded it. Tamara brought food she did not eat and said things she did not hear. The world had become something happening to someone else, something she watched from a great distance without caring about the outcome. Then came the morning she vomited so hard she thought her body would turn inside out. And she knew even before she bought the tests what they would say. 3 positive pregnancy tests sat on her bathroom counter like tiny bombs, waiting to explode her life into even smaller pieces. Susie stared at them until the sun set and the room went dark, until the plastic sticks were just white shapes in the shadows, until she understood that she had 2 choices: fall apart completely or find a strength she did not know she possessed. She chose the second option because something inside her refused to let Jack Lehman destroy her utterly. Susie tried calling him 17 times over 3 days, leaving messages that grew increasingly desperate. She needed to tell him about the pregnancy, needed to give him a chance to do the right thing, even though he had already proven he was incapable of it. On the 4th day, a woman called her back. "This is Claudette Pierce, Mr. Lehman's executive assistant," the voice said with professional disdain. "Mr. Lehman has asked me to inform you that he considers your brief involvement concluded, and any further attempts to contact him will be treated as harassment with legal consequences. Please, I just need 5 minutes to tell him something important. If you are experiencing financial difficulties as a result of your poor choices, Mr. Lehman is not responsible. Seek assistance elsewhere." The line went dead. Susie tried calling again, but Jack's number was blocked. She sent emails that bounced back undeliverable. She stood outside his office building until security threatened to call the police. Finally, she understood that Jack Lehman had erased her from his life as thoroughly as if she had never existed, and she was carrying his children alone. Susie sat in her apartment that night with her hand pressed against her still flat stomach, making a promise to the life growing inside her. She would raise these children alone. She would never ask Jack Lehman for anything. She would build a life so strong that neither she nor her babies would ever need a man who could betray them so completely, and she would teach them that some people are beautiful on the outside while being completely empty within, that love does not protect you from cruelty, and that the only person you can truly depend on in this world is yourself. The pregnancy test sat on her kitchen table like evidence of her own stupidity, and Susie Overton began planning her disappearance from a life that had already disappeared her. Chapter 2. The Forging. Grief has a weight that cannot be measured but can be felt in every movement, every breath, every moment you are forced to continue existing when part of you has died. Susie packed her apartment in 3 days, taking only what would fit in her aging sedan. Clothes, a few books, photographs of her grandmother, the small collection of things that made up a life she was abandoning. Everything else she gave to Tamara or left on the curb for strangers to claim. "You do not have to run," Tamara said, helping carry boxes down 4 flights of stairs. "You could stay. We could fight this together. There is nothing to fight." Susie folded another sweater, her movements mechanical. Jack made his choice. "I'm making mine. What about the baby?" Babies?" Susie's hand moved to her stomach, the gesture already becoming habit. The ultrasound showed twins. 2 boys. Tamara's face crumpled. "Jesus, Susie, you cannot do this alone. Let me come with you. You have a life here, a career. I'm not dragging you into my disaster. You are my best friend. Your disaster is my disaster." But Susie was already gone in her mind, already rebuilding herself into someone harder, someone who could survive what was coming. She left the city on a Tuesday morning, when the streets were still dark, driving north toward the ocean and the small coastal town where her grandmother's cottage waited like a refuge from a life that had imploded. Fairhaven appeared through the fog exactly as she remembered it. Small houses with weathered shingles, streets that smelled like salt and fish, a harbour full of boats that had seen better years. The cottage sat at the end of a gravel road, surrounded by wild roses that her grandmother had planted decades ago, and that now grew wherever they pleased. The roof leaked, the plumbing groaned, the windows stuck and the floors creaked. But it was hers, fully paid for, and it represented safety in a world that had proven itself viciously unsafe. Susie found work at the Harbour View restaurant, waiting tables 6 days a week for tips that barely covered groceries. She took evening shifts answering phones for an insurance agency, her voice professional and detached, while she scheduled appointments for people whose biggest problems were fender benders and flood damage. On weekends, she cleaned vacation rentals, scrubbing toilets and changing sheets while her back ached and her body transformed into something unfamiliar. The pregnancy was brutal. Morning sickness that lasted all day, swelling that made her shoes impossible to wear, exhaustion so profound she sometimes fell asleep standing up. Her body was creating 2 humans, and it demanded everything she had to give, and then more. Phyllis Brennan, who managed the Harbour View, took one look at Susie's situation and became the mother she needed. Phyllis had buried her own daughter 5 years earlier, and she poured that unused love into the broken girl who showed up asking for work. "Sit down before you fall down," Phyllis ordered, pushing a plate of food across the counter during a slow afternoon. "You are eating for 3 now, and I will not have you fainting in my restaurant. I can pay for it." "I did not ask if you could pay. I said eat." Susie ate, tears sliding down her face without permission, and Phyllis pretended not to notice. The twins came early on a September morning that started with back pain, Susie mistook for exhaustion. She was cleaning a rental property alone when her water broke, soaking through her jeans and flooding across the kitchen floor she had just mopped. The ambulance arrived in 12 minutes that felt like hours, and the paramedics asked questions she could barely answer through contractions that felt like her body was tearing itself apart. Jacob arrived first, tiny and perfect and screaming his fury at the world. Willow followed 8 minutes later, quieter, but with eyes that seemed to see everything, even though the doctor said newborns could not focus yet. They were too small, their lungs not fully developed, and the nurse whisked them away to the intensive care unit before Susie could hold them. She lived in the hospital waiting room for 2 weeks, pumping breast milk every 3 hours and praying to gods she did not believe in. The medical bills accumulated like a mountain she would never climb, but all that mattered was that her sons kept breathing. Jacob came home first, and a week later, Willow followed. Susie carried them into the cottage and understood that her life had fundamentally changed. She was responsible for 2 tiny humans who depended completely on her for survival, and there was no one coming to help. She returned to work when the twins were 3 weeks old, carrying them in bassinets that she set up in the restaurant storage room during her shifts. Phyllis let her bring them, said babies belonged with their mothers, and if any customer complained, they could eat somewhere else. Susie worked through exhaustion that made her hallucinate. She worked through cracked nipples and mastitis. She worked through the kind of physical pain that becomes so constant you stop noticing it. She worked because stopping meant failure, and failure meant her sons would suffer. Meanwhile, 4 hours south in the city she had fled, Jack Lehman married Bianca Ashford in a ceremony that made international headlines. He stood at the altar in his perfect tuxedo and repeated vows that meant nothing, sliding a platinum ring onto the finger of a woman he did not love. The reception cost more than most people earned in a lifetime, and Jack smiled for photographs while feeling nothing except the vast emptiness where his heart used to be. Bianca moved into the Lehman estate, and Jack discovered that his wife viewed their marriage as a transaction. She had her own bedroom, her own social calendar, and her own life that occasionally intersected with his for public appearances. Eleanor approved completely, praising Bianca's poise and social connections. And Jack understood he had married exactly what his mother wanted. Late at night, when the house was quiet, Jack sometimes stood at his bedroom window, staring at nothing, and remembering Susie's face the moment he called their love meaningless. He crushed those memories immediately, telling himself he had made the right choice for his family. That personal happiness was a luxury people like him could not afford, but in dreams he could not control. He heard Susie's voice asking him to tell her the truth, and he woke up reaching for someone who was not there and never would be again. In Fairhaven, Susie discovered that survival could become its own kind of strength. When Jacob was sick with colic that made him scream for hours, she walked him through the night while Willow slept peacefully. When Willow refused to eat anything except applesauce for 2 weeks straight, she bought so much applesauce, the store clerk asked if she was stocking a fallout shelter. When both boys got ear infections simultaneously and the pharmacy bill exceeded her grocery budget, she skipped meals so they could have medicine. She learned that she was capable of things she never imagined, that she could function on 3 hours of sleep, that she could soothe a crying baby while simultaneously preparing bottles and folding laundry, that she could love so fiercely it hurt, a physical ache in her chest every time she looked at her sons. When the twins turned 1, Susie bought a cake from the grocery store and sang Happy Birthday in the cottage, while Jacob and Willow smashed frosting into their hair. There were no guests, no celebration, just a mother and her babies in a tiny house by the ocean. But it was enough, because they were together and they were surviving. She started making invitations in the evenings after the boys went to sleep, designing cards on her laptop and printing them on cardstock she bought in bulk. Her first customer was a woman planning a small wedding, and Susie created something beautiful for $50. The woman posted photos on social media, and suddenly Susie had 3 more customers, then 10, then 20. Overton events grew slowly but steadily. Susie expanded into full event coordination, planning weddings and celebrations with the same fierce attention to detail she applied to everything in her life. She had an eye for beauty on a budget, an ability to create magic from ordinary things, and her reputation spread through the coastal towns like wildfire. By the time Jacob and Willow were 4, Susie had rented a small office downtown and hired Tamara, who had finally convinced Susie to let her help. They worked together, building something real, something that belonged entirely to them. Susie was no longer the girl who had believed in fairy tales. She was harder now, tempered by years of struggle into someone who did not break easily. She taught her sons that love was action, not words. That family was what you built, not what you were born into. That sometimes the people who should protect you are the ones who hurt you most. But you survive anyway. When Jacob asked about his father one evening while she tucked him into bed, Susie chose her words carefully. "Your father was not strong enough to love you the way you deserve," she said, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. "But that is his loss, not yours. You and Willow are my everything, and we do not need anyone else to be complete." "Do we have a dad?" Willow asked from the other bed, his serious eyes watching her face. "You have me," Susie said firmly, "and I am enough." She believed it too, most days. Believed that she had built a good life from the wreckage of her heart, that her sons would grow up whole and loved despite their father's absence. She had convinced herself that Jack Lehman was part of a past she had moved beyond. A painful chapter closed and forgotten. But late at night, when the cottage was quiet and her sons slept peacefully in their room, Susie sometimes pressed her hand against the window glass and remembered what it felt like to believe in love. Before she learned that some people could look you in the eye and lie so completely that truth became a stranger. She had survived. She had built something beautiful from nothing. She had raised 2 perfect boys alone and taught them they were enough, but she had never truly healed. And the scar tissue around her heart was thick enough to stop anything from touching her again, until the day, years later, when the past walked back into her life and demanded to be acknowledged. Chapter 3. The Revelations. There are moments when your entire understanding of reality shifts. When you discover that the foundation you built your life upon was constructed from lies, and everything you thought you knew disintegrates into ash. Jack Lehman experienced such a moment on his birthday when he came home early from meetings and found his wife in their bed with another man. He stood in the doorway of the master suite, watching Bianca and Donovan Mercer scramble apart. Their faces flushed and guilty, and Jack felt nothing except a distant curiosity about why he was not more devastated. Perhaps because the marriage had been hollow from the beginning, a beautiful facade covering emptiness so profound it had its own gravity. "Jack," Bianca pulled the sheet around herself without any real shame in her expression. "You were supposed to be gone all day." "Clearly." Jack's voice was flat, detached, as though he were commenting on the weather rather than his wife's infidelity. "How long has this been happening?" "Does it matter?" Bianca stood, wrapping herself in a silk robe that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and Jack noticed she did not even attempt to apologize or pretend this was a mistake. "Our marriage has been a performance from the start. You knew that. I knew that. This changes nothing about the arrangement we have." "The arrangement," Jack tasted the words, finding them bitter but accurate. "Is that what we are calling it now?" Donovan Mercer dressed quickly, his smugness barely concealed beneath a thin veneer of civility. "Jack, if you had been any kind of real husband to her, she would not have needed to find satisfaction and genuine connection elsewhere. You have no one to blame but yourself." The urge to hit him rose and died in the same breath. Jack was tired, so profoundly exhausted by the endless pretending that violence seemed like too much effort to expend on someone so fundamentally irrelevant to his existence. "Get out of my house," Jack said quietly, each word precise and cold. "Both of you, now." "Your house?" Bianca laughed, sharp and cruel. "I have been living here for years. I'm your wife. You cannot just throw me out because your pride is wounded by reality. Watch me." The divorce was spectacular in its ugliness. Bianca hired lawyers who painted Jack as emotionally absent, controlling, a husband who drove his wife into another man's arms through neglect and coldness. The tabloids feasted on every detail, society columnists dissecting their marriage with gleeful cruelty, and Jack's reputation suffered while Bianca positioned herself as the wronged party seeking freedom from a loveless union. Jack did not care. He signed papers, attended depositions, and let his lawyers fight while he felt himself hollowing out further, becoming less human with each passing day. The only emotion he could reliably access was a dull, persistent rage at his own choices, at the life he had built on foundations of cowardice and social obligation. Eleanor suffered her stroke 3 weeks into the divorce proceedings. Jack found her collapsed in her sitting room, her face twisted and slack on one side, her body crumpled like something broken and discarded. For the first time in years, he felt genuine fear punch through the numbness. She was his mother, cold and controlling and impossible, but she was also the only constant in his life, and losing her would mean floating completely untethered in a world he no longer understood. She survived, but the stroke left her partially paralyzed, her speech slurred and difficult, her right side weak and uncooperative. Jack visited the hospital every day, sitting beside her bed while she slept or stared at him with eyes that held something he had never seen in them before. Regret. Deep, corrosive regret that seemed to eat at her from the inside. One evening after the nurses left them alone, Eleanor began to cry, tears sliding down the slack side of her face while she struggled to form words through damaged neural pathways that no longer obeyed her commands. Jack. His name came out thick, almost incomprehensible, and he had to lean close to understand. "Need to tell you something. Cannot wait any longer. Mother, rest. We can talk when you are stronger." "No." Her good hand gripped his with surprising strength, her fingers digging into his wrist with desperate urgency. "Cannot wait. Might be dying soon. Must tell you before I face judgment for what I did. You are not dying. The doctor said you will recover. Am dying inside. Have been dying inside for years. And I cannot meet God with this sin on my soul. Cannot leave this world without confessing what I destroyed." Jack leaned closer, his chest tightening, with something that felt like dread crawling up his spine with cold fingers. Eleanor's confession emerged in broken fragments, each word a struggle, each sentence a new revelation that shattered his understanding of the past. A woman named Susie Overton, pregnant with his child, trying desperately to reach him through phone calls and messages that grew increasingly frantic. Claudette Pierce blocking every attempt at contact, intercepting every message, paid handsomely by Eleanor to ensure Jack never knew about the pregnancy. Eleanor's voice cracked as she admitted orchestrating the entire conspiracy, protecting the family from what she considered a disastrous entanglement that would have ruined everything she had built, preserving the merger with the Ashfords that had been years in the making. "I destroyed your happiness," Eleanor whispered, her tears flowing freely now, mixing with the drool that escaped from the paralyzed corner of her mouth. "Stole your children from you. Stole your chance at real love, at a genuine life. All to protect our name, our position, our precious social standing. And for what? Your marriage is over. You are miserable. You hate your life. I ruined everything that mattered for things that do not matter at all." Jack sat frozen as his mother's words detonated his understanding of the past 7 years. Susie had tried to tell him. She had been pregnant with his child, maybe multiple children, reaching out for help while he remained oblivious, protected from the truth by conspirators who believed they knew better than he did what his life should be. Where is she now? Jack's voice came from somewhere far away, hollow and strange in his own ears. I do not know. She disappeared completely, vanished without a trace. I tried to find her later, after you married Bianca, because I started to understand what I had done, but she was gone. I'm so sorry, my son. I'm so terribly, unforgivably sorry for what I stole from you. Jack left the hospital in a daze, his mind unable to process the magnitude of what he had learned, the scope of the betrayal that had shaped his entire adult life. He drove to his office at midnight and stood outside Claudette Pierce's locked door, his hands shaking with rage so pure it felt like clarity, like the first honest emotion he had experienced in years. She arrived the next morning to find him waiting in her office, sitting in her chair, having used his master key to enter during the night. Mr. Lehman. Claudette's surprise quickly smoothed into professional composure, her face arranging itself into practiced neutrality. I was not expecting you this early. Is there something you need? Tell me about Susie Overton. Something flickered behind her eyes, quick as lightning, but her expression remained carefully neutral. I'm afraid I do not recall that name offhand. Perhaps if you provided more context? Do not lie to me, not now. Not about this. Jack's voice was dangerously quiet, each word sharp enough to cut. My mother told me everything. The phone calls you blocked, the messages you intercepted, the $50,000 she paid you to keep Susie away from me, to ensure I never knew about the pregnancy. Claudette sat down slowly, and Jack watched the calculation happening behind her face, saw her weighing options and deciding whether denial or admission served her interests better. She chose admission, which surprised him. I did what was necessary for the family, she said finally, no apology in her tone, no hint of remorse coloring her words. That woman was completely unsuitable for someone of your position and standing. She would have ruined everything your mother built over decades, would have trapped you with a pregnancy clearly designed to secure her financial future. I protected you from making a catastrophic mistake that would have destroyed your life. She was pregnant. Jack's voice shook despite his best efforts to control it. You knew she was carrying my child, and you kept that information from me. You decided, without my knowledge or consent, that my own children were not worth knowing about. I kept you from making a decision based on misplaced obligation rather than rational thought. If you had known about the pregnancy, you would have felt compelled to do the honorable thing, would have destroyed the Ashford merger that was crucial to your future, would have tied yourself permanently to someone so far beneath your station that your reputation would never have recovered. I made the hard choice so you would not have to. Jack stared at this woman who had worked for him for years, who had answered his calls and managed his schedule, and apparently decided she had the right to control his entire life, to determine who was worthy of him and who was not. You are fired, he said, the words cold and final as a death sentence. Security will escort you out within the hour. You will receive no severance, no recommendation, nothing. If you ever contact me or anyone in my family again, if you ever speak about Susie or this situation to anyone, I will destroy you so thoroughly and completely you will wish you had never been born. You are making a mistake. That woman will ruin you. No, I made a mistake trusting you, trusting my mother, trusting that the people around me had my best interests at heart. Now get out of my sight before I do something I will regret. After she left, Jack sat alone in his office, surrounded by the trappings of success that suddenly felt meaningless, and tried to understand how many lives had been altered by his mother's interference and his own fundamental cowardice. Somewhere out there, possibly not far away, Susie was living a life he knew nothing about, possibly raising his child alone, hating him with a hatred he absolutely deserved and had earned through his weakness. He began searching that afternoon, hiring private investigators who specialized in finding people who did not want to be found. He conducted internet deep dives, checking every database and social media platform, tracking down anyone who might have known Susie in the city before she vanished. His sister Gabriel joined the search when he told her what had happened. She cried, admitting she had always known Jack loved Susie in a way he had never loved anyone before or since, had seen him happier during those 8 months than any other time in his life. "I should have fought harder against Mother," Gabriel said, her voice thick with guilt that mirrored his own. "I should have stood up for you, for Susie, for what was right instead of what was expected. I was a coward too, and I am so sorry." "We were all cowards," Jack said bitterly, the words tasting like poison. "And Susie paid the price for our collective weakness." The divorce finalized after 8 months of warfare, costing Jack a fortune he barely noticed losing. Money meant nothing when your entire life was revealed to be built on betrayals and lies, when you understood that every choice you had made was wrong. He became obsessed with finding Susie, not just from guilt, but from the devastating realization that she had been the only genuine thing in his carefully constructed existence. And he had destroyed her because he was too weak to stand up to his mother's expectations, too cowardly to choose love over approval. Late at night, Jack looked at photographs from those 8 months they were together, images he had hidden but never deleted because he could not bring himself to erase the only proof that he had once been capable of real feeling. Susie laughing at something he said, her joy so pure and uncomplicated it hurt to witness. Susie sleeping peacefully in his bed, her face relaxed and trusting in ways that now seemed impossibly naive. Susie looking at him with love so complete it had terrified him into running towards safety. He had chosen comfort over courage, approval over authenticity, the easy path over the right one. And now he was drowning in the consequences of those choices, suffocating under the weight of his own cowardice. Eleanor recovered enough to return home, confined to a wheelchair but mentally sharp, her mind untouched by the stroke that had damaged her body. She watched Jack with haunted eyes, understanding she had destroyed her son's chance at happiness, and there was no undoing the damage, no making right what she had made so terribly wrong. "Find her," Eleanor said one evening when Jack visited. Her speech improved, but still slurred around the edges. "Find Susie and beg her forgiveness on your knees if you must. Make this right if you possibly can. And if I cannot make it right, then you will live with what we did for the rest of your life, just as I will. But at least try. At least give her the chance to tell you herself how thoroughly we destroyed her." Jack hired more investigators, expanded the search nationwide, and refused to accept that Susie had simply vanished into nothing. She was out there somewhere, living a life he had forced her into through his weakness, possibly raising his child alone, while hating him with perfect justification. The thought of missing years of his own child's life made him physically ill, bile rising in his throat every time he imagined a son or daughter growing up without knowing their father existed. He would find her. He would explain what happened, would lay bare the conspiracy that had kept them apart. He would beg forgiveness he did not deserve and try to be the father he should have been from the beginning. But first, he had to find where she had gone when his betrayal destroyed her world and forced her to rebuild from nothing. Chapter 4. The Collision. Some prayers get answered in ways that feel more like punishment than blessing, delivering exactly what you begged for while destroying everything you built to survive without it. Jack found Susie at a charity fundraiser in a coastal town he had never heard of until his investigators located a woman matching her description running a successful event planning company in a place called Fairhaven. He stood in the ballroom of the Fairhaven Community Center watching her work, and his heart stopped beating for several seconds, maybe longer. She was different, fundamentally, irrevocably different. Harder than he remembered, her movements precise and confident, her interactions with guests professional but lacking the natural warmth he had fallen in love with. She wore a burgundy dress that emphasized strength rather than softness, her hair pulled back in a severe style that made her cheekbones sharp and her eyes harder. Her entire presence radiated a competence born from years of fighting battles alone and winning through sheer force of will. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, and she looked at him like he was death itself walking toward her through the crowded room. Their eyes met across the space filled with strangers, and Jack watched every emotion flash across her face in rapid succession. Shock first, her eyes widening in disbelief that he was actually standing there. Then pain, raw and immediate, cutting across her features like a knife. Rage followed, hot and bright, transforming her face into something fierce and dangerous. Finally, a cold mask slammed into place with such force he felt it like a physical blow across the distance separating them. Then Susie looked away, said something sharp to the woman beside her, and walked quickly toward a side exit, her entire body language screaming rejection. Jack followed without thinking, his body moving before his mind could process the implications or consequences. He caught up to her in the hallway outside the bathrooms, calling her name, and when he spoke, she froze in place as though his voice had turned her to stone. "Susie." She turned slowly, every movement deliberate and controlled, and when she finally faced him fully, her voice could have frozen fire in its tracks. "You need to leave, right now. I know I am the last person you want to see, but please just give me 5 minutes to explain what happened. 5 minutes, and then I will leave if that is what you want." "Explain what?" Her laugh was bitter and sharp enough to draw blood. "Explain how you announced your engagement to another woman days after telling me you loved me. Explain how you let your mother and your fiancé humiliate me in front of hundreds of people while you stood there silent as a statue. Explain how you called what we had meaningless when you knew it was everything to me. There is nothing you can explain that will change what you did. My mother and my assistant conspired to keep you away from me after that night. I only found out months ago that you tried to contact me, that they blocked every message and threatened you with legal action. I swear on everything I am, I did not know you were trying to reach me." "I do not care." The words came out flat and final, each one a door slamming in his face. "Your mother could not have manipulated you if you had possessed an ounce of courage or integrity to begin with. The betrayal started the moment you chose. Your family's approval over me the moment you stood on that stage and announced your engagement knowing I would be there. Everything after that was just consequences flowing from that first fundamental act of cowardice." Jack felt the truth of her words like knives sliding between his ribs, each one finding its mark with perfect accuracy. "You are completely right. I was a coward. I chose what was easy and safe over what was real and true, and I have spent every day since regretting that choice. But I am here now, and I am asking for a chance to make this right." "Good." Susie's eyes were hard as diamonds, glittering with rage that had been banked for years but never extinguished. "I hope you regret it for the rest of your life. I hope it haunts you every single day until you die. I hope you never forget what you destroyed, never stop seeing my face when you close your eyes at night. I want to make this right. Please, tell me how to make this right." "There is no making it right. There is no going back. There is only moving forward with the life I built from the pieces you left me with. The life I created from nothing while you were playing house with your perfect wife in your perfect mansion." Movement caught Jack's attention, and he looked past Susie to see a woman with dark curly hair herding 2 young boys toward the exit. His breath stopped completely, his lungs forgetting how to function. The boys were young, maybe 5 or 6, and even from a distance. Even through the crowd, Jack could see himself reflected in their faces. The shape of their features, the way one held his head at a slight angle, the serious expression on the smaller one's face that mirrored Jack's own childhood photographs. "Are those my sons?" The question came out broken, barely a whisper, his voice failing him completely. Susie's mask cracked for just a second, revealing pain so profound and bone-deep that Jack wanted to fall to his knees. Then it sealed again, harder and more impenetrable than before. "They are my sons. Mine. You have no claim to them, no right to them, no connection to them at all." "Susie, please. Those are my children. You gave up any right to them when you stood silent at that gala and let your family destroy me. You gave up any right to me when you called our love nothing in front of everyone. Now stay away from us, or I will get a restraining order so fast it will make your head spin. I will make sure you cannot come within 1,000 feet of my children." She walked away, and Jack stood frozen in the hallway while his entire world rearranged itself around a truth he could barely comprehend. A reality so massive it threatened to crush him under its weight. He had sons. Two beautiful boys he had never held, never known about, never been given the chance to love. Twin sons, judging by their similar appearance and size. And their mother hated him, with a hatred so pure and justified that he had no defense against it, no argument that could penetrate her armor. Jack walked outside in time to see Susie loading the boys into a car, her movements quick and efficient. He moved toward them without thinking, calling her name, and she turned with fury, blazing in her eyes like fire. "Do not come near my children. Our children. Susie, those are our sons. I have a right to know them. They are my sons. I carried them alone in my body while you married someone else and smiled for wedding photographers. I gave birth to them alone in a hospital room while you were on your honeymoon with your perfect wife. I raised them alone while you played at being a husband to a woman you did not love. You made your choice, Jack. You chose your family's approval and your comfortable life over me and any future we could have had. Now live with the consequences of that choice." "I did not know." His voice broke completely, shattering into pieces that matched his heart. "I swear on everything I am, everything I have ever been, I did not know you were pregnant. If I had known, if anyone had told me, I would have been there. I would have fought for you, for them, for us. I would have burned my entire life down to be with you. You should have fought for me anyway." Susie's voice shook with rage she'd been holding inside for 7 years, rage that had nowhere to go until this moment. "I should have been worth fighting for even without being pregnant. But I was not, was I? I was just something to keep you entertained, something to make you feel alive until the real part of your life began. I was never real to you. None of it was real. That is not true. You were the realest thing in my life. You were the only real thing I had ever experienced. Then you are even weaker than I thought, because you threw away the realest thing in your life for approval from people who did not actually care about your happiness or well-being. You sold your soul for comfort, and I paid the price for your cowardice." Jack watched her get in the car, watched his sons peer at him through the window with confused curiosity in their identical faces, and felt something inside him shatter so completely he would never be whole again. He had spent 2 years searching for Susie, but nothing had prepared him for actually finding her, for seeing what his betrayal had forged her into, for understanding that the woman who had loved him so completely was gone forever, replaced by someone who looked at him with nothing but contempt and rage. Susie's car pulled away, taillights disappearing down the street, and Jack stood alone in the parking lot of a community center in a town he had never been to before, understanding that finding her was just the beginning of a much longer and infinitely more painful journey. Because she was right about everything. He had been weak. He had chosen comfort over courage, approval over love, safety over risk. He had taken the easy path and destroyed the only thing that had ever truly mattered. And now he had to find a way to prove he was not that man anymore, that he could be the father his sons deserved, and somehow, impossibly, earn back even a fraction of Susie's trust. The night air was cold against his face, and Jack felt it all the way through to his bones, felt it settling into the hollow spaces where his heart used to be. He had found his family. Now he had to figure out how to become worthy of them, how to transform himself into someone capable of the courage he had lacked when it mattered most. Chapter 5. The Siege. Obsession and love wear the same face, and sometimes the only difference is whether the object of that devotion wants you back or is running as fast as they can in the opposite direction. Jack rented a house in Fairhaven the day after finding Susie, cancelling every commitment, ignoring every call from his office and the life he had left behind. The rental overlooked the harbour, and from the upper windows he could see the street where Susie lived with their sons, could watch Jacob and Willow play in their small front yard when they came home from school. He knew it looked like stalking, knew he was behaving exactly like the kind of person who gets restraining orders filed against them. He did not care. Every other priority in his life had evaporated the moment he saw his sons, leaving only this singular desperate need to be near them, to understand who they were, to somehow find a way into their lives. Every morning before dawn, Jack positioned himself where he could see his boys leave for school. He learned their routines with obsessive attention to detail, their habits and patterns becoming his entire world. The way Jacob walked with confidence and energy, practically bouncing down the street. How Willow seemed more cautious and observant, watching everything before acting. How they took the bus together, Jacob carrying both their backpacks, even though Willow protested. How they held hands crossing the street, an unconscious gesture of protection and connection. He was a ghost, haunting the edges of their lives, and the pain of proximity without actual connection was exquisite in its intensity, a constant ache that never diminished. Susie noticed immediately, of course. She was too smart and too vigilant not to see him everywhere she went. She began changing routes, varying schedules, doing everything possible to avoid him. One morning she appeared at his rental house before dawn, her fury barely contained behind a facade of cold control. "Stop following us!" Jack stood in his doorway, unshaven and exhausted from another sleepless night. "I am not following you. I'm just existing in the same town, trying to understand the lives I should have been part of. You're watching our house like some kind of predator. You show up everywhere we go. You are scaring my children, and I will not tolerate it for another second. I have not approached them. I have not spoken to them. I have maintained distance. I'm just trying to understand who they are, what they like, how they move through the world. They are none of your business." Susie's voice shook with rage that threatened to break through her control. "I built a life here where we are safe and happy and free from people like you. You have brought your poison into it, contaminated everything with your presence. Leave, Jack. Go back to your city and your empire and your empty life, and leave us alone to live ours. They are my sons. Biology does not make you a father. Being there makes you a father. Loving them when it costs you something makes you a father. Showing up every single day, regardless of how hard it gets, makes you a father. You have done none of those things. You are a stranger who happens to share their DNA, nothing more, because I did not know they existed. Because your attempts to contact me were deliberately blocked by people who decided they knew better than I did what my life should be. You did not know because you chose not to know. You chose a woman you did not love over making sure I was okay after you destroyed me in that ballroom. You chose your mother's approval over taking 5 minutes to call me yourself and see if I was all right. Every choice you made, every decision you took the easy path on, led directly to this moment where you are standing in front of me claiming victimhood. But you are not a victim, Jack. You are the architect of your own disaster, and now you want me to feel sorry for you because your choices had consequences. Jack had no defense because she was completely, devastatingly right. Every decision had been his own. Every act of cowardice had rippled outward into consequences that could not be undone. And those consequences were standing in front of him, refusing to let him near the children he had never known about. "Tell me what I need to do," he said quietly, each word costing him something. "Tell me how to prove I have changed, that I am not the man I was back then. There is nothing you can do. Some damage cannot be repaired. Some trust cannot be rebuilt once it is shattered. You taught me that love is a lie people tell to manipulate you into vulnerability, and I will not let you teach that same poisonous lesson to my sons. They are happy. They are whole. They do not need you coming into their lives and destroying the security I have spent years building for them." She left before he could respond, and Jack stood watching her walk away down the gravel road, understanding that proximity was not enough, that being in the same town as his children, while being forbidden from knowing them, was its own special variety of torture designed specifically for his sins. His phone rang constantly with calls from people in his old life. Raymond Coulter, his second-in-command and closest thing to a friend, left increasingly urgent messages about board meetings and investor concerns, about decisions that needed to be made and crises that required his attention. Jack ignored them all, deleting voicemails without listening, letting the empire he had built slowly crumble while he focused entirely on the family he had never known. Then Raymond showed up in person, tracking Jack down at a coffee shop where he sat pretending to read the newspaper while actually watching the elementary school across the street through the window. "You need to come back," Raymond said without preamble or greeting, sliding into the seat across from him with the kind of familiar presumption that comes from years of working closely together. "Donovan Mercer is making aggressive moves. He has been talking to board members, reaching out to major investors, painting you as unstable and absent. He is positioning himself for a hostile takeover, and without you there to counter his narrative. He might actually succeed. Let him have it." Raymond stared at him as though he had announced plans to set himself on fire. "Jack, this is your company. You built it from absolutely nothing. You cannot just walk away and let Donovan destroy everything you created. Watch me. What happened to you? Where is the man I worked beside for years? That man was building an empire on foundations of cowardice and lies. That man sacrificed everything real for things that do not actually matter. That man destroyed the only woman he ever loved and abandoned children he did not know existed. I do not want to be that man anymore." Raymond shook his head slowly. "You are throwing away everything for children you have never even met, for a woman who clearly wants nothing to do with you. They are my sons. And yes, I am throwing away everything I built on false foundations, because I already threw away what mattered most once before. I will not make that same mistake twice. I will not choose money and power and social position over my own children. Not again. Never again." Raymond left, looking like he had just witnessed someone having a complete mental breakdown, and Jack went back to watching the school, waiting patiently for a glimpse of boys who did not even know he was their father. He learned through observation what he could not learn through interaction. Jacob was fearless and energetic, always the first to volunteer, the first to raise his hand, the first to try something new. Willow was more cautious and analytical, watching before acting, thinking before speaking, protecting his more impulsive brother from consequences. They were beautiful and perfect, and completely out of his reach. The situation deteriorated rapidly when Jack showed up at Jacob's soccer game without asking permission or giving warning. He stood far from the other parents, trying to be inconspicuous, watching his son run across the field with determination and focus that reminded Jack painfully of himself at that age. Susie appeared at his side within minutes, materializing like an avenging angel, her voice low and dangerous. "Leave, right now, immediately. I am watching my son play soccer. That is all. Just watching. You are violating boundaries I set very clearly and explicitly. If you do not leave this field within the next 60 seconds, I will call the police and tell them you are stalking us." "And tell them what exactly?" "That the biological father of your children wants to watch them play sports and participate in their lives. I will tell them you are stalking us, harassing us, making us feel unsafe. I will get a restraining order that prevents you from coming within 500 feet of my boys. I will make it legally impossible for you to be near them. Test me, Jack. Please test me and see what happens when you push me past my limits." Jack looked at her profile, saw the absolute steel in her jaw, the unwavering determination in her posture, and knew with complete certainty that she meant every single word. He left the soccer field, but the taste of defeat was bitter as poison on his tongue. That night, his past came roaring back to destroy what little progress he thought he might be making. A tabloid journalist named Felix Krantz published an article with the headline, "Billionaire's Secret Shame, Jack Lemon's Abandoned Children." The article was detailed and vicious, naming Susie and the boys explicitly, publishing photos of them at school and around town, painting Jack as a man who hid his illegitimate children from society while maintaining his public image. The story was designed for maximum damage, and it worked perfectly. Within hours, the article had gone viral across social media platforms and news outlets. By morning, Fairhaven was invaded by reporters and photographers, all desperate for additional details, for interviews, for anything that would feed the insatiable beast of public curiosity. They camped outside Susie's house with telephoto lenses and recording equipment. They followed her to work, shouting questions she refused to answer. They tried to interview her clients and friends, promising money for any information about Jack Lemon's secret family. Susie's business began suffering immediately and catastrophically. Clients cancelled contracts, uncomfortable with the media attention surrounding their event coordinator. Parents at school whispered and pointed and pulled their children away from Jacob and Willow as though scandal were contagious. The safe, quiet life Susie had spent 7 years building was being torn apart by exposure to Jack's world, exactly as she had always feared. She confronted him outside his rental house the next evening, and her fury made everything that came before seem mild by comparison. "This is your fault. All of this is directly your fault. This is what happens when you force your way into our lives against our will. You brought this nightmare here with your presence. And now my children are being photographed and followed and scared because reporters want a story about your redemption. Are you satisfied? Is this what you wanted when you decided to play at being a father?" "I did not contact any media. I would never expose them like this. Someone else must have leaked this story. Probably someone from my past trying to hurt me. I do not care who leaked it or why. It happened because of you, because you could not just leave us alone when I asked you to. We were fine before you showed up. We were happy and safe and whole. And now everything is falling apart, crumbling under the weight of your world, crashing into ours. And my children are paying the price for your sins. Let me fix this, please. Let me use whatever resources I have to make this stop. You cannot fix this. You cannot fix anything. Everything you touch turns to poison, Jack. Everything you involve yourself in becomes contaminated. And I was stupid and naive to think you had changed at all, to believe for even a second that you were different from the man who destroyed me 7 years ago. You are the same selfish coward you always were, just with better excuses and a more convincing performance." Her words landed like physical blows, each one finding its mark with devastating accuracy, but Jack knew he deserved every syllable. His presence had brought chaos into her carefully controlled world, and their sons were suffering for it, paying for his mistakes. That night, Jack made a decision that felt like the first honest choice he had made in years. He could not change what had already happened, could not undo the damage his appearance had caused. But he could control what came next. He would hold a press conference. He would tell the complete, unvarnished truth without spin or careful language. He would own every mistake publicly and use whatever power and influence he had left to protect his sons from further exposure. It was the absolute least he could do, and possibly the only thing that might prove to Susie that he was finally actually capable of choosing courage over comfort when it truly mattered, even if it cost him everything he had left, which was not much anyway. Chapter 6. The Breaking Point. Terror comes in many forms, but the worst kind is watching your child suffer and being completely powerless to stop it, to fix it, to take their pain into your own body where it belongs. Susie knew something was catastrophically wrong when Jacob woke up covered in bruises that appeared overnight like some kind of terrible magic. Dark purple marks blooming across his arms and legs and torso like poisonous flowers. He was exhausted in a way that sleep did not fix. His usual boundless energy replaced by a lethargy that frightened her down to her bones. "Mama, I do not feel good," Jacob said, his voice small and scared in a way she had never heard before. Willow hovered nearby, his serious eyes full of worry for his brother, picking up on the tension radiating from their mother. "Is Jacob sick? Is he going to be okay?" "We are going to the doctor right now," Susie said, forcing calm into her voice while terror screamed through every nerve ending. "Just to be safe and make sure everything is fine." The emergency room doctor took one look at Jacob's symptoms and ordered immediate comprehensive blood work. Susie sat in the sterile waiting room, holding Willow close, while her mind spun through every horrible possibility she had ever read about or heard whispered, each scenario worse than the last. When the doctor returned after what felt like hours, but was probably only 40 minutes, his face told her everything she needed to know before he spoke a single word. "We need to talk about your son's test results. Privately, if possible." Susie asked Tamara, who had rushed to the hospital the moment she heard, to take Willow to the cafeteria. Then she sat in the small conference room and listened to words that felt like they were destroying her entire world. Acute myeloid leukemia, aggressive form, requiring immediate treatment, chemotherapy starting within days, bone marrow transplant, likely necessary for long-term survival. Susie stopped hearing individual words after a while, her mind unable to process that her healthy, vibrant, perfect son had cancer, that his own body was betraying him from the inside, that she might actually lose him despite all her years of fierce protection. "Is my brother going to die?" Willow asked later, his small voice cutting through Susie's shock when they were reunited in Jacob's hospital room. "No," Susie said with absolute fierce certainty, pulling both boys close against her body. "Jacob is going to fight this disease, and we are going to fight with him, and he is going to be completely fine. I promise you both." But the doctors explained with gentle clinical precision that Willow was not a bone marrow match, that they needed to test biological parents next because parental donors offered significantly better odds of compatibility, that every day they waited decreased Jacob's chances of full recovery. Susie sat in the hospital conference room after Jacob finally fell asleep, staring at the wall and facing an impossible choice that felt designed specifically to torture her. She could let her pride and rage potentially cost her son's life, or she could call the man who destroyed her and ask him for help, thereby giving him the opening into their lives she had sworn would never exist. "You have to call him," Tamara said gently, sitting beside her and taking her hand. "I know you hate him. I know what he did was unforgivable in every possible way. But Jacob needs him. Your son's life is more important than your pride or your justified anger." "I cannot," Susie's voice broke into pieces. "I cannot ask Jack for anything. I cannot give him this chance to worm his way back into our lives. Once I call him, once he knows about this, I will never be free of him again. This is not about you or Jack or what happened between you. This is about saving your son's life. Nothing else matters. Not your pride, not your rage, not your fear. Only Jacob matters right now." Susie looked at her son through the window separating them, his small body hooked up to machines and monitors, his face pale against the white hospital pillow, And she understood with devastating clarity that motherhood meant sacrificing absolutely everything, including her pride and her carefully maintained walls. For her children's survival, she made the call, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone. Jack answered on the second ring, his voice wary. "Susie, Jacob is sick." The words came out broken and raw. "He has leukemia. He needs a bone marrow transplant, and Willow is not a match. The doctors say biological parents offer the best chance of compatibility. I need you to come get tested as soon as possible." Silence stretched across the connection for several heartbeats. Then Jack's voice emerged rough with emotion. "I'm on my way right now. Text me the hospital address. I will be there as fast as humanly possible." He arrived within hours, still wearing the clothes he had been in when she called, looking like he had aged several years during the flight north. Susie met him in the hospital lobby, and for the first time since he reappeared in her life like a ghost from a past she had tried to bury, she saw genuine fear in his eyes that mirrored her own. "Where is he? Can I see him?" "You need to get tested first. They need your blood work before anything else can happen." Jack submitted to the testing without hesitation or questions, and then they waited in a silence that felt heavier than any words could possibly be. When the doctor returned with results, after what felt like an eternity, Susie watched Jack's face transform as he learned he was a nearly perfect match, that he could actually save their son's life. "I can save him," Jack said, wonder and grief and desperate relief mixing in his voice. "I can actually save my son." The transplant was scheduled as quickly as medical protocols allowed, and Jack refused to leave the hospital during the entire preparation and procedure. He stayed in waiting rooms that reeked of disinfectant and fear. He brought Susie coffee she was too anxious to drink and food she could not imagine eating. He tried to offer comfort she would not accept, respecting her boundaries while making his presence felt. After the successful procedure, when Jacob was stable and sleeping peacefully under heavy medication, Jack finally met his sons properly for the first time in Jacob's hospital room. Jacob was weak but alert enough for conversation, his eyes curious as he studied the stranger sitting carefully beside his bed. "You are the person who gave me your bone marrow," Jacob said with childlike directness. "The doctor said you saved my life." "I am, and I would give you absolutely anything you needed, anything at all. Why would you do that for someone you do not know?" Jack glanced at Susie, asking silent permission, and she gave a small, reluctant nod. "Because I am your father. I did not know about you and your brother for a very long time, and that is entirely my fault and my failure. But now that I know you exist, now that I have met you, I want to be part of your lives, if you will let me. If your mother will let me." Willow, sitting protectively on the other side of Jacob's bed, spoke up with the serious tone he always used when asking important questions. "Where were you before? Why were you not there when we were born?" The question hung in the air between them, and Jack did not look away from his sons' identical faces, did not hide behind easy lies or comfortable excuses. "I was being a coward. I was scared of doing the right thing because it was hard and would cost me things I thought were important. So I did the easy thing instead, the comfortable thing. And that choice meant I was not there when you were born, and I missed so much of your lives. That is something I will regret for the rest of my life, every single day." "Did you hurt our mama?" Willow asked, his protectiveness towards Susie evident despite his young years. "Yes, I hurt her very badly in ways that cannot be easily explained. She has every right to be angry with me, to hate me, to want me nowhere near any of you." Jacob processed this information with the straightforward logic of children who have not yet learned to hide behind polite fiction. "Are you sorry for what you did?" "More sorry than I have words to properly explain or express." "Okay." Jacob yawned, exhaustion pulling at him, despite the importance of the conversation. "You can stay here until I fall asleep if you want, if that is okay with Mama." Jack looked at Susie one more time, asking permission without words, and she gave another small nod that felt like it cost her something vital. He stayed, reading to Jacob in a quiet voice until the boy drifted off into medicated sleep. And Susie watched this man who had destroyed her sitting beside their son with such evident tenderness it physically hurt to witness. Later, when both boys were finally asleep and Jack had stepped out to give her space, Susie let herself cry for the first time since the diagnosis. She cried for Jacob's illness and the terror of almost losing him. She cried for the impossible choice she had been forced to make. She cried for the complicated relief that Jack had been able to save their son when no one else could. But she also cried because saving Jacob's life did not erase the past, did not heal her wounds, did not make Jack suddenly trustworthy or safe or worthy of the trust her sons were already offering him with heartbreaking innocence. When Jack returned to find her crying, he stood in the doorway without approaching, without trying to comfort her, just bearing witness to her pain without trying to fix it or make it about himself. "Thank you," Susie said finally, her voice raw from crying. "Thank you for saving him. Thank you for being a match. Thank you for coming when I called. You do not need to thank me. He is my son. This is what fathers do. Saving his life does not change anything between us. It does not mean I forgive you or trust you or want you in our lives permanently. I know that. I still do not trust you. I still have not forgiven you for what you did to me. I know that too. I do not expect forgiveness. I do not deserve it. But the boys deserve to know their father if you are actually serious about being one and not just playing at it until the novelty wears off." Jack's expression transformed with something that looked like desperate hope struggling against resignation. "I am completely serious. I will do whatever it takes to prove that to you and to them. Whatever it takes for however long it takes. Then prove it. Not with words that mean nothing. With actions that matter. Show up consistently. Be reliable. Put them first, even when it is inconvenient or difficult. And maybe eventually I will believe you are capable of it." It was the smallest possible opening, barely a crack in the armor she had built around herself and her sons, but Jack took it like a drowning man grabbing a rope thrown from shore. And Susie saw him understand that this was his one chance to be the father he should have been from the very beginning. Jacob's recovery would take months of careful monitoring and follow-up treatment, but he would survive. The transplant had been successful beyond what the doctors initially hoped for. And now Jack would have to survive the much harder test of proving himself worthy of his son's trust and love over time, through consistent action rather than empty promises. Chapter 7. The War. Forgiveness is not a single act, but an accumulation of small surrenders over time, and some wounds resist healing no matter how much you want them to close and stop bleeding. Jack moved into his Fairhaven rental house permanently, transforming the temporary shelter into something resembling an actual home, rather than just a place to sleep. He learned to cook simple meals that his sons might enjoy, stocked the pantry with foods appropriate for children, prepared a bedroom with 2 twin beds in case they were ever allowed to stay overnight. Susie agreed to supervised visits after Jacob's initial recovery stabilized. One afternoon each week, with conditions so strict they felt like legal contracts. No gifts that looked like bribes to buy affection. No promises he might not keep that would disappoint them. No attempts to undermine her authority or contradict her parenting decisions. Any sign that the boys were confused or distressed by his presence would end the arrangement immediately and permanently. Jack accepted every condition without argument or negotiation, understanding he was being granted something precious and fragile that could be snatched away if he made a single wrong move. The first visit happened at a public park with Tamara serving as supervisor and mediator. Jacob and Willow were shy initially, unsure how to interact with this stranger who was somehow their father. This man who had saved Jacob's life but had not been part of theirs before. Jack brought a soccer ball and asked if they wanted to play together, engaging them through action and shared activity rather than forcing awkward conversation or demanding emotional connection that had not been earned. Jacob warmed to him gradually over that first afternoon, asking questions about where Jack lived and what he did during his days. Willow remained more guarded and suspicious, watching Jack carefully for any hint of threat or deception, any sign that he might hurt their mother again. "Do you have other kids besides us?" Jacob asked during a water break, his question innocent but cutting. "No, just you and your brother. You are my only children. Why did you not know about us before?" The question was asked with childlike directness, without understanding how deeply it cut, and Jack chose honesty over comfortable fiction that might protect him. "Because I made terrible choices when I was younger. I hurt your mama very badly through my weakness and cowardice, and I was too much of a coward afterward to make sure she was okay. That meant I missed finding out about you until very recently. I will regret that for the rest of my life." "That was really dumb," Jacob said, with the blunt assessment only children can deliver without malice. "It was. It was the dumbest, worst thing I have ever done in my entire life," Willow spoke up, his voice carrying weight beyond his years. "Mama cries sometimes at night when she thinks we do not know or cannot hear her. She tries to hide it, but we can tell. Did you make her cry like that?" Jack felt the question like a physical blow to his chest, stealing his breath. "Yes, I made her cry many times. I'm sorrier about that than anything else in my life, sorrier than I have words to express properly. You should tell her you are sorry then." "I have told her many times. But some things are too big and terrible for sorry to fix. Some damage cannot be repaired just by apologizing. So instead, I'm trying to show her through my actions over time that I have changed, that I am not the same person I was when I hurt her." The visits continued over subsequent weeks, and Jack learned his sons in small, careful increments. Jacob loved space and dinosaurs, and anything to do with ancient history, asking endless questions about stars and planets and creatures that had been extinct for millions of years. Willow was artistic and deeply intuitive, drawing pictures of things he observed and somehow capturing emotional truths in stick figures and bright crayon colors. Jack brought books about astronomy and art supplies in their next visits. Not expensive gifts designed to buy affection, but thoughtful responses to who his sons actually were as individual people. He learned that Jacob was naturally fearless and impulsive, while Willow was cautious and analytical, that they protected each other fiercely with an intensity that transcended normal sibling bonds, that they shared an entire private language of looks and gestures that came from being twins who had only ever had each other. He fell in love with them so completely and profoundly it physically hurt, an ache in his chest that never entirely went away. Meanwhile, his continued absence from his former life was having entirely predictable consequences. Raymond called repeatedly with increasingly urgent warnings about hostile takeover attempts, about board members losing confidence in Jack's leadership, about major investors demanding his immediate return or threatening to pull their support. "You need to come back to the city right now," Raymond insisted during one late-night phone call that Jack almost did not answer. "Everything we built together over years is falling apart. Donovan has successfully orchestrated a coordinated attack, and without you here to counter his narrative and reassure people, he is going to win. You are going to lose everything." "Then let it all fall apart," Jack said calmly, watching his sons play through the park fence during their scheduled visit. "Let Donovan have the company. I missed 6 irreplaceable years of their lives. I'm not missing another single day for buildings and money and power that mean absolutely nothing compared to them. This company is your legacy. Everything you worked for. No, they are my legacy. My sons are my legacy. Everything else is just money and buildings and ego. None of it actually matters. I understand that now in a way I never did before." He ended the call before Raymond could argue further, and days later he learned through a terse legal notification that he had lost control of the company he founded and built. That Donovan Mercer had successfully orchestrated a takeover that removed Jack from any leadership position. When Susie heard about this development through mutual connections in their overlapping social circles, she showed up at his house unannounced one evening after the boys were in bed. "You lost your company. Everything you built. I chose my sons over a company. There is an important difference between losing something and choosing to let it go." Something flickered across her expression, too quick for Jack to properly identify or interpret. The old Jack, the man I knew before, would never have chosen anything over his professional success and reputation. Never. I am not that man anymore. I cannot be that man anymore. He was weak and cowardly, and he destroyed everything that mattered for things that did not matter at all. People do not change that fundamentally. Not really. Not in ways that last. Then watch me every single day and I will prove you wrong through consistent action over time. She left without another word. But Jack noticed over the following week that the visits were quietly extended to 2 afternoons per week, and Tamara's supervision became gradually less intrusive and more relaxed. The fragile progress they had been building exploded catastrophically when Willow got into a serious physical fight at school with a boy who called him and Jacob bastards, who said they had a deadbeat father who only showed up when it was convenient, who made their mother cry. Susie was called to the principal's office to discuss the incident, and when she arrived still shaking with protective fury, Jack was already there because the school had contacted him as well. The principal suggested family counseling to address the underlying issues, and Susie and Jack met with Willow together in a small conference room that smelled like industrial cleaner and anxiety. Their son broke down crying in a way neither of them had seen before, admitting he was angry and confused about everything, about having a father now, but remembering years of being sad when other kids had dads at their games and events, while he and Jacob had no one. Jack knelt directly in front of Willow, his voice steady, despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him and break through his careful control. "Your anger is completely fair and justified. I deserve every bit of it and more. You do not have to forgive me for missing those years, for not being there when you needed a father, because I do not forgive myself. I will never forgive myself for that failure. But I promise you, from this moment until forever, I will be here. I will show up for you and your brother. You can be angry with me while still being loved by me. Those two things can exist together." Willow threw himself into Jack's arms without warning, sobbing against his shoulder, and Jack held his son while meeting Susie's eyes over Willow's shaking body. He saw something crack and shift in her carefully maintained defenses, saw her witnessing him choose their son's emotional well-being over his own comfort and need for absolution. That evening, after the boys finally went to bed exhausted from emotion, Susie asked Jack to stay rather than leaving immediately. They sat on her porch overlooking the dark harbor, and she spoke without looking at him directly. "I see you trying with them. I see you putting them first, showing up consistently, being patient when they are difficult. But trying is not the same as succeeding, and I cannot let you hurt them the way you hurt me. I cannot let them experience that kind of betrayal and abandonment. I understand completely." "Do you really?" "Because they are already attached to you in ways I cannot control or prevent. If you decide this is too hard, if you eventually go back to your old life and old priorities, they will be absolutely destroyed. And I will never forgive you for that. Never. I am not going anywhere. I am not leaving them. I am not returning to that old life. You said similar things to me once. You said I was your future. You said you loved me. And then you destroyed everything with your weakness. Words mean nothing to me anymore, Jack. I only believe actions sustained over long periods of time." Jack had no defense because her point was devastatingly valid. Words meant nothing when his previous actions had proven him capable of complete betrayal when faced with pressure. "Then do not believe my words at all. Watch my actions every single day. Judge me entirely by what I do, not what I say. Hold me to impossible standards and see if I meet them anyway. Susie finally looked at him directly, her expression unreadable in the dim light filtering from inside the house. "I want to hate you. It would be so much easier and cleaner if I could just hate you without complication. Why can you not? Because I see you with our sons, and I see glimpses of the man I thought you were before everything fell apart. The man I fell in love with. And that makes me angrier than anything else, because it means some part of that person was real, and you chose to destroy him anyway. You chose to become someone else, someone worse, and now you are trying to find your way back." They sat in silence after that observation, the distance between them vast, but perhaps no longer quite as insurmountable as it had been weeks or months before. Chapter 8. The Shift. Healing happens in the quiet spaces between words, in the small repeated gestures that accumulate over time until they become something resembling trust, or at least the possibility of trust. Jack established a routine with his sons that Susie gradually stopped supervising quite so carefully. School pickups twice each week on designated days, weekend breakfast together every Saturday morning without fail, bedtime video calls on the nights they were not physically together. He learned to braid hair when Willow inexplicably decided to grow his out longer, despite Jacob's teasing. He memorized which vegetables each boy hated with passion and which foods were acceptable subjects for dinner negotiations. He became a father through repetition and presence, through showing up consistently even when it was difficult, through putting his son's needs and wants above his own comfort and convenience every single time, without exception. One Saturday morning, Jacob asked if they could finally see where Jack actually lived. Susie hesitated for a long moment but eventually agreed, and Jack gave his sons a tour of the rental house that had become his permanent home, his entire world reduced to this small space and the people he loved. "This bed is for me?" Jacob asked, bouncing experimentally on one of the twin beds in the room Jack had prepared months ago, with hope and desperation. "For you and Willow, whenever you want to stay overnight, if your mama decides that is okay someday." Willow explored the art supplies Jack had carefully stocked in the corner, touching the sketch pads and expensive colored pencils with something approaching reverence. "Can I draw here whenever I want?" "Absolutely, any time you want. This is your space, as much as it is mine." The boys stayed for lunch, and Jack taught them how to make grilled cheese sandwiches properly, laughing when they burned the first batch and had to start over. Susie picked them up in the afternoon, and he saw her taking in the space he had created specifically for their sons. Seeing the evidence of his commitment written in twin beds and art supplies, and a refrigerator completely covered in drawings the boys had made for him over weeks. She did not comment directly, but the following week she agreed to overnight visits starting the following month, and Jack felt something shift in his chest at that sign of growing trust. Meanwhile, Eldona Lehman asked through Gabriel if she could please meet with Susie. The request came as a surprise, and Susie's first instinct was immediate refusal, wanting nothing to do with the woman whose actions had helped destroy her life. But something made her agree eventually, perhaps curiosity about the person whose interference had shaped so much of her existence. They met in Eleanor's sitting room, the older woman confined to her wheelchair, but mentally sharp, despite the physical limitations imposed by her stroke. Eleanor looked at Susie with eyes that held genuine remorse and the kind of regret that eats people from the inside. "I destroyed your life," Eleanor said without preamble or softening. "I destroyed my son's chance at genuine happiness. I stole irreplaceable years from my grandchildren, and I did all of it because I valued social position and family reputation over human connection and love. Why are you telling me this now? Because you deserve to know the complete truth before you make final decisions about Jack's future with his sons. You deserve to understand that his love for you was real and profound and terrifying to him. I saw it frighten him because it made him vulnerable in ways he had never experienced, and I deliberately exploited that fear to tear you apart for my own purposes. That does not excuse what he did to me. It does not erase the humiliation or the abandonment. No, nothing excuses what he did. There is no excuse for that kind of betrayal. But fear makes cowards of us all, and I weaponized his fear to serve my own selfish purposes. He chose wrong when it mattered most, but I made absolutely certain the wrong choice was easier than the right one. I removed every obstacle to his cowardice and built walls around his courage. Susie felt tears threatening, despite her best efforts to remain unmoved and controlled. Do you expect me to forgive you for what you did? I expect absolutely nothing from you. I'm simply giving you information you should have before deciding Jack's future role with his sons. He was weak when you needed him to be strong, but he loved you deeply. Both things can be simultaneously true. After Eleanor left, assisted by Gabrielle, who offered Susie an apologetic look, Susie allowed herself to cry, grieving for the young woman who had loved so completely and been shattered so thoroughly by that love. Tamara held her while she sobbed, and when the storm of emotion finally passed, Susie felt something shift inside her. Not forgiveness exactly, but acceptance that the past had happened and could not be changed, only integrated into who she was now. That evening, Jack came for dinner with the boys, as had become their weekly tradition. And afterward, when Jacob and Willow were playing in their room, Susie asked him to stay longer. "Your mother came to see me today." Jack's expression tightened with immediate concern. "I did not ask her to do that. I would never ask her to interfere again after what she already did. I know you did not ask her. She wanted me to understand that your love for me was genuine, even though you were ultimately too weak to fight for it when fighting would have cost you something. It was real. It is real. It has never stopped being real even when I tried to kill it." Susie looked at him carefully, really looked, seeing not the man who had destroyed her, but the man who was slowly building himself into someone worthy of their sons through patient, consistent effort. "I forgive you," she said quietly. The words costing her something, but also freeing something inside her chest. Jack's entire body went completely still. "What did you say?" "I forgive you for what you did to me. Not because you deserve forgiveness, or because I think you have earned it, but because I refuse to let your betrayal and my justified anger define the rest of my life and poison everything I touch. I forgive you as the father of my children, as someone who is genuinely trying to be better than he was." "And as anything else besides a co-parent?" Susie met his eyes steadily, her voice careful. "I do not know if I can ever trust you with my heart again the way I did before. That trust was shattered too completely. The pieces do not fit back together the same way. But I can trust you with our sons now, and maybe that is enough for whatever comes next." Jack nodded slowly, understanding that what she was offering was more than he had any right to expect after everything. "Thank you for giving me this chance, for letting me be their father despite everything, for not taking that away when you absolutely could have. Do not make me regret it. Do not prove me wrong for believing you have changed. I will not. I swear on everything I am or ever will be, I will not." They sat together in the growing darkness. Two people who had loved and destroyed each other, slowly building something new from the wreckage of what had been. It was not romance. It was not the reunion of lovers, but it was progress and possibility, and sometimes that is all anyone can reasonably hope for. Chapter 9. The Catalyst. Some moments arrive disguised as disasters, revealing themselves only later as necessary, breaking points that force impossible clarity from confusion and force truth from comfortable lies. Felix Krantz published his follow-up article on a Tuesday morning, and by noon, Fairhaven was once again invaded by aggressive media, seeking additional details about Jack Lehman's secret family and redemption narrative. Photographers camped outside Susie's house with telephoto lenses. Reporters actively harassed her clients. Parents at school whispered and pointed, while Jacob and Willow tried desperately to understand why strangers with cameras followed them. Everywhere, Susie's carefully rebuilt life was collapsing under the weight of exposure to Jack's world, exactly as she had always feared, and her fury was absolute and consuming. She confronted him at his house, her voice shaking with rage, barely contained behind a facade of control. This is what happens when you force your way into our lives against our will. You brought this nightmare here with your presence, and now my children are being hunted by photographers who do not care about their safety or well-being. Fix this immediately, or I swear I will disappear so thoroughly you will never find us again. Jack made a decision in that precise moment. He could protect his remaining reputation and try to manage the narrative carefully, or he could protect his sons completely regardless of cost. There was no middle ground, no compromise position. He called a press conference for that same afternoon in Fairhaven's town square. The media gathered eagerly, expecting careful statements crafted by expensive lawyers. Instead, Jack stood before cameras and told the complete, unvarnished truth without spin or protective language. He explained in detail that he had fallen in love with Susie, but had been too cowardly to stand up to his family's prejudices and expectations. He described the public humiliation he had inflicted at the gala in terms that made his guilt unmistakable. He admitted that his mother and assistant had conspired to keep Susie's pregnancy from him, but took full personal responsibility because his fundamental cowardice had created the environment where such manipulation was possible. He apologized publicly to Susie, not asking for forgiveness, but acknowledging the full magnitude of his betrayal in ways that made clear he understood exactly what he had done. He made explicitly clear that Jacob and Willow were his sons, whom he loved desperately and was fighting to be worthy of. Then he issued a warning. Any media outlet that published further photos of his children or harassed his family in any way would face immediate aggressive legal action. He would use every resource at his disposal to protect them, and he did not make empty threats or idle promises. The press conference was picked up nationally within hours. Public opinion split sharply between those who admired his raw honesty and those who condemned his past actions. But the media frenzy around Fairhaven died within days as journalists moved to other stories and easier targets. Susie watched the footage alone in her office after the boys were safely asleep. She saw Jack do what he should have done 7 years earlier, publicly choose her and their children, at significant cost to himself, without excuses or deflection or attempts to minimize his guilt. Something inside her cracked, not forgiveness of the romantic kind, but recognition that Jack had finally demonstrated the courage he had completely lacked before, when it mattered most. She called him that night. That press conference. What you said, that was brave. It was 7 years too late to matter. Yes, but you did it anyway, and that counts for something. Silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid and everything that might never be said. The boys want you to come to Jacob's birthday party next month, Susie said finally. Just family, Tamara and Gabrielle and us, no one else. I would love that more than anything. This does not mean I am ready to trust you romantically or let you back into my heart. That may never happen. Those wounds may never heal properly. I know. I understand that completely. But the boys love you genuinely now, and you have earned the right to be their father through consistent action over months. That matters. Jack's voice broke slightly. Thank you. That is more than I deserve or had any right to expect. After they disconnected, Susie sat in the darkness and allowed herself to feel something she had not permitted in years. Hope that maybe, possibly some broken things could be rebuilt into something different but still valuable. Not the same, never the same as it was, but perhaps something worth having anyway. Jacob's birthday party happened on a sunny afternoon in Susie's backyard. Jack arrived with carefully chosen gifts he had discussed with Susie in advance: a telescope for Jacob's space obsession and a professional art set for Willow's drawing. Both boys were thrilled, and Jack spent the afternoon teaching Jacob about constellations while Willow drew portraits of everyone present. Tamara and Gabrielle talked quietly, both women who had witnessed the entire journey and understood its significance. At one point, Jacob asked both his parents to help build a sandcastle together, and for the first time since reuniting, Jack and Susie worked together on something beyond pure logistics. They laughed when waves destroyed their construction, rebuilt with the boys' enthusiastic help, and in those moments, Susie caught glimpses of what their life might have been if courage had been chosen over fear years before. Later, after guests left and the boys played in the fading light, Jack told Susie that watching her with their sons had taught him what real courage actually looks like in practice. "You built this entire life alone. You raised them to be kind and brave and whole. I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn even a fraction of the respect you deserve." Susie admitted that seeing him sacrifice his company and comfort had shown her he was capable of growth she had not believed possible. "I do not know if I can ever love you again romantically," she said with complete honesty. "That wound is too deep. But I do not hate you anymore, and that is something significant." "That is everything," Jack said quietly. They stood together watching their sons play, two people who had loved and destroyed each other, slowly learning to coexist in a space between past hurt and future possibility. It was not a happy ending, but it was a beginning, fragile and uncertain and real. Chapter 10. The Price of Pride. 6 months passed in a rhythm of shared custody and careful cooperation. Jack and Susie navigating their new reality with the caution of people who knew exactly how badly things could go wrong and were determined not to repeat past mistakes. Jack had the boys 3 days each week, learning to be an actual parent through endless trial and error. He mastered bedtime routines and homework help, and the particular tone needed when one brother was picking on the other. He attended school conferences and soccer games and art shows, cheering with pride that hurt his chest in the best way. Susie watched him grow into fatherhood, seeing his genuine love for their sons, his patience when they were difficult, his joy in their accomplishments. She found herself able to have civil conversations with him about parenting strategies, to coordinate schedules without tension, to slowly build a partnership that actually worked. The romantic distance between them remained vast, Susie's heart still protected by walls built from betrayal, but the hostility had transformed into something gentler that might someday become friendship. One evening, Willow got into trouble for fighting a boy who said their family was weird. Susie and Jack went to the school together, and their son broke down, admitting confusion about how to feel about everything. Jack told Willow his anger was fair, that he deserved it, but that anger and love could coexist. Willow threw himself into Jack's arms, and Susie watched her son find comfort with his father, feeling her defenses crack further. That night, she asked Jack to stay after the boys slept, and they talked until dawn about everything: the gala, the pregnancy, the years alone, the journey to this point. "I have been so focused on protecting myself from further hurt that I have not allowed myself to see who you are now," Susie admitted, "distinct from who you were." Jack told her he understood if she never wanted anything beyond co-parenting, that he had accepted living with the ghost of what they could have been. "But if you ever found it possible to consider giving me a real chance to prove myself, not as the boy's father, but as a partner to you, I would spend every day earning that trust back." Susie did not answer because she did not have one, but she allowed herself to consider that maybe, someday, there might be a path forward. Time continued moving. They coordinated holidays, slowly building traditions as a blended family. On Christmas morning, Jack arrived early with gifts, and they watched the boys open presents together. There was a moment when their hands accidentally touched, reaching for wrapping paper, and neither pulled away immediately. It was not romance, but it was not hostility either. On New Year's Eve, Jack came for dinner, and as he prepared to leave after the boys slept, Susie called his name from the porch. "The boys want you to stay for fireworks." "Maybe you could." Jack's face transformed with cautious hope, and he walked back toward where his sons and the woman he had never stopped loving waited. Susie did not embrace him or declare love, but she stepped aside to let him enter, and that gesture represented years of pain and proof, and the fragile beginning of something that might, with patience, someday become whole again. They watched fireworks with the boys between them, small hands reaching for both parents equally. As midnight struck, Susie felt Jack's eyes on her. "What?" she asked softly. "I was thinking I do not deserve any of this." "No, you do not. But our sons deserve a father, and you have earned that right through consistency and sacrifice. And you, what do you deserve?" Susie looked at him, really looked. "I deserve someone who chooses me every day without hesitation, who stands up for me even when it costs them everything. I will be that person, however long it takes. We will see." It was not a promise or forgiveness of the romantic kind, but it was not refusal either, and in that space something fragile began to grow. The fireworks faded, and they took the boys to bed. Jack helped tuck them in, kissing each forehead with tenderness that still amazed Susie. "Thank you for tonight. They are your sons, too. You have shown me that." He nodded and left, understanding some distances take years to cross. That trust shattered cannot be quickly rebuilt. Susie closed the door and leaned against it, feeling everything they had survived and everything uncertain. She did not know if she would ever love Jack again the way she once had, but she knew he was learning to be the father their sons deserved. And maybe, eventually, he could prove himself worthy of something more. The future remained unwritten, but for the first time in 7 years, Susie allowed herself hope that perhaps some broken things, given enough time and care, could be rebuilt into something different but still whole. Not the same, never the same, but maybe, just maybe, enough. The end.